So Tracey, how you been?
I'm all right. We had our week of in-service this week, so we are as ready as we're going to be for Monday. The kids start Monday. We're teaching virtually, but from our classrooms. So that was our
Okay.
that was
So
really-
so
that
so
was
you're
fun.
totally remote, but the teachers are in school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think the plan is as soon as possible bring in. We have a pretty robust life skills program. So I think the plan is to start getting some of our kids who have a hard time really benefiting from Zoom instruction, getting them back in as soon as is possible and healthy, and then starting with our kindergartners and on up. So we'll
Awesome.
see. The
Yeah.
middle schools, we'll see what happens to the middle school kids.
So thank you to all of you who are joining us on Facebook Live or who are watching this recording later on. This is part of our contributor and author series coming up to the launch of Flip the System US, How Teachers Can Transform Education and Save Democracy. Now available on Amazon for pre-order, should be shipping early this fall. I'm really exciting because there are 23 chapters by 32 amazing contributors. And Tracey Fritch, who's with me today, is one of those chapter authors. And her chapter was a case study on a distributed leadership model in a school out near Fresno, California, just doing some amazing work. So I'm really excited to talk to Tracey. We've known each other for a while, so we're just catching up for a bit. So Tracey, so first day with students is on Monday, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And how has this summer been for you?
Short.
Yeah.
We had one of our longest years ever. We worked, I know a lot of districts didn't hold their staff to the full length of their contract, but ours chose to. We had about 2 weeks of in-service after the kids finished. And so, which was good. It gave us a chance to really sort of process the year and get ourselves ready. So, we went till the end of June and we were back last Monday. So it felt like it almost didn't happen. It was so fast, but
Yeah. It's what it is, right? It's what it has to be.
We have a person with asthma in the family, so we weren't really going to go anywhere fancy anyway. So it was restful. It took a couple weeks to sort of bounce back from the whole experience of spring, and then we went on lots of hikes and walked around our neighborhood. We got a dog like everyone else.
Yeah. So I am definitely going to ask you some questions about some of the amazing teacher leadership work that you've done this summer and during the spring with PTAC, with the Teacher Advisory Committee. But before we get into that, I really want to dive into your chapter that you wrote. So you wrote about Sanger Unified School District, this amazing case study, and I got to say, like, they are doing just awesome work out there in their district. But it started with a video call that we had with the superintendent out there, Adela Jones. So tell me about your impressions of that first call and what you learned and how that kind of led into some of the other work that you did with this chapter.
I think, leading up to it, I read a fair amount about the district, which was helpful to kind of see it on paper. One of the things that really struck me was what a community they are. I think first and foremost that that every child is everybody's child, and that they tend to promote from within. So there's a culture that feels like a community there, and they have the community among the staff and the community with the surrounding community, so that they really are serving the whole child. I was just so impressed by, and I also feel like, and this is something I just talked to the co-author of my blog post for PTAC. They have a brand new principal in her school, and just 4 days ago decided it would be better to have a brand new reading curriculum to start the school year, because it got better ratings and whatever. And we had a conversation about, how easy it is to get caught up in the flavor of the month and whatever the latest thing is, but that they chose instead for the long haul to really focus on their staff. And they had unity of philosophy, but not sort of a blind adherence to curriculum. So to me, I credit that almost the community aspect and that sense of like they know who they are, and they develop their teachers and their kids and their administration all in service of who they are. And it's paid off in amazing ways. I still talk about them all the time.
Yeah, and so what's really interesting about distributed leadership, the model that they use, and I think this is true. There's different distributed leadership models, but all of them, I think, are grounded in a philosophy that the practitioners in your district, your teachers especially, but also your principals and administrators that are at the point of contact with students and with your staff, that they are most knowledgeable about the resources in your community and how to educate the unique kids that you have in front of you, as opposed to textbook companies that are trying to sell you textbooks or reading programs or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. That the expertise lies in your hired staff. But I also know that at Sanger, that wasn't always the case. Like you described the culture there beautifully now. But their change came out of necessity because they were failing miserably, back before they started instituting that. So talk a little bit about the changes that they made structurally and some of the benefits that happened in the district.
I think a couple of things. One of the things that struck me was the way they looked at the layers of leadership, I think they called it, that it was, one principal wasn't the direct support for hundreds of teachers, which is what happens in a lot of places, or even 100 teachers. And that they, similar to the way a corporation might do it, they made, they put a layer of teacher leadership in there and a layer of what they called, I think, curriculum service providers, so that they had people that the teachers were looking to that could sort of directly support their practice and could deeply support their practice. I think that structural change really allowed them to take the work of changing the work of the teachers in service of the kids seriously and more regularly. In addition to that, the teachers became supports more formally for each other with their PLCs. And I loved that even led to some of this. They had they had like professional learning communities, and they ended up with student learning committees as well, because it became such a part of the culture that they were going to do the work and then examine it and put their heads together and solve problems and then go forward. I liked that they were data supported, but not sort of data obsessed, that they use the data to guide them. And I really liked the way they talked about even how they adapted their use of data over time. In the beginning, it was a lot of sort of like, how can we just improve our test scores? And in time, it evolved to like, how will it be better instruction?
Yeah. And so, I mean, so I've got my Flip the System shirt on here.
There you go.
Right. But when people ask me, so what is this Flip the System? What does it mean? What I try to explain to them is we are looking to, right now, that education is in most places, and especially when you look at it on a grand scale in the United States, is very top down and very hierarchical, where it's coercive, right? The federal government tells the states what to do, states tell district administrators then tell their principals tell teachers tell kids, right? And along the way, we use these levers, whether it's grades or money or whatever, to try and force compliance, right? But flipping the system is really flattening that hierarchy. And instead of building the system on coercion, it's built on partnerships and inspiration and collaboration, right? And what Sanger has done is really flip the system at that local level within their district. And you talk about data, so they still use quantitative data. They still have test scores that they're using and they're giving assessments, but there's also in their professional learning community model, there's so much qualitative data where they're getting to the lived experiences of students and staff to understand their community better than they would otherwise. And that's what's really driving some of the decisions, right? But those PLCs, they had to structurally change their schedule to put those in, right?
Yes, yeah. So they had to, it was different, if I remember correctly, it was different at the different levels. They had to do different things at the high school than at the elementary schools, but there's a dedicated commitment to every week they're all sitting down together, and they will often have sort of like a goal for the year, if I remember correctly, that they're sort of working towards. So yeah, it was really impressive. I think it's the step that a lot of places miss, the sort of ongoing commitment to, it doesn't have to be, the new flavor of the month. I think, like I said before, it's this sort of eyes on the prize, keep on plugging along bit by bit, and changing maybe precise focus, but that the teachers are just always, I like that when they talked about the shift to more of the teacher-made assessments as they went along. So the teachers were the ones thinking. The other thing that I talk about all the time that we're using, I know with my team this year, is the way they talked about the guaranteed and viable curriculum. So they took the standards, and certain standards became sort of guaranteed curriculum, like things that these are the, in no way could we ever not teach these things.
And non-negotiables, yeah.
Right. And so they were able then to design the assessments, the formative assessments along the way to be sure they were always focusing on the things that were most important and that they'd all agreed were most important. And that was something, we borrowed it for my teaching team this year, because they're just, even though we're going to have more minutes in front of the kids this year than we did in spring, there isn't any way that we're going to cover, right, the amount of standards or lessons or whatever it is, the system's just not going to allow for it. So we're hunkering down, and I actually stole Mari Cooper's idea, and I had a little round table with I invited about 20, and I ended up with about 10 or 12 of last year's kids. They either wrote me back in an email, or they met with me in a Zoom meeting, and we talked about what were the most important things you learned last year that you feel like, or that we did, it could be like activities or lessons. And then what can I not take out for next year's kids because it's helpful for life or for future school? And they were really impressive. A group of 13-year-olds was like, well, let me tell you that TDA is a made up genre and you need to just forget about it because nowhere else in life. And I had to laugh, and they had this sort of wisdom of now they're 8th graders and they know better. But I just, that whole mindset of being able to say, you can't cover it all equally. We have to figure out what's the most important, and we all just have to keep at the things so we get it, which leads you to better differentiation, which was the other thing that really impressed. Like their RTI system, when you looked at their triangle, half of the triangle was academic interventions and the other half of the triangle was the SEL interventions, and every kid worked toward the grade level standards and got whatever supports they needed to get there. So if you know where you're headed and you're just going to give whatever supports you need to get everyone there, then you can create the rest of the system behind it.
Yeah. And so for those of you that are just joining us, I'm talking with Tracey Fritch. She was a chapter author, did an amazing case study on the Sanger Unified School District in the upcoming book, Flip the System US, How Teachers Can Transform Education and Save Democracy. You just mentioned Mari Cooper. Mari wrote another chapter. Hers was on how to flip the system down to the student level, how to not flip your classroom using videos, not in that way, but flip the system of your classroom to empower your kids so that they can not only learn the curriculum better, but also learn how to be better democratic citizens through the choices they're making and through the autonomy they have in their classroom. And of course, we'll be interviewing Mari on our later Facebook Live broadcast. But you just mentioned SEL and how academics is not the sole focus of this distributed leadership model at Sanger, where teachers are given more autonomy and agency in the process. They have regular meetings with administration to make sure their expertise is filtering up to the decision-making process. But within that SEL, I know that their MTSS system, their multi-tiered system support system, is a big component of how they build community. I know they use restorative justice practices in there to make sure they're building community. Can you talk a little bit about how that fits in with their structure and what they're doing?
Well, I do know that if I remember right, and it's been a couple months now, but I think she talked about the social emotional changes and sort of the tone in the building changes being the first thing that people noticed. That you just walked into the building and the general feel of the building felt different. The demeanor of the kids were more empowered to learn, and the behavior issues sort of melted away, that people would walk into the building and just feel like it felt like a different place. That was sort of the start of that. Sorry, yeah, SEL, right? And then it went off on that, 'cause I thought that was a really powerful statement. I also think from an SEL perspective, I think sometimes we congratulate schools that have lots of financial advantage for doing so well, and you forget that sometimes places where there aren't as great of financial advantages, you forget that a lot of the kids, and kids everywhere this is true for, but a greater percentage are struggling against adversity that's social emotional before they even make it to school. And so I think the fact that they were developing relationships with the churches and different community groups, I think they even called it communities of caring, and then the fact that they were giving the social, rather than, I'm listening to Ijoma Oluo's So You Want to Talk About Race right now. That's my current book, and that was her lived experience, that her brother in particular was sort of flagged early on as a troublemaker, and no one bothered to ask, about why a different thing was happening, and that she ended up becoming, a tech person and then an author, whereas he ended up dropping out of high school, and she attributes that to people sort of pegging him as a certain kind of kid rather than asking him what was going on and kind of supporting him to be his best self.
Right, and so in the district we can see that, and I think I have your chapter here, so I'm going to read just some of the district demographics so that people know exactly what we're talking about. So the district has about 20 schools, over 12,000 students. More than 66% of them are economically challenged, living in poverty. It is a majority minority district. 70% of students are not white, are different races. The majority of them being Hispanic or Latinx, I believe.
Mhm.
I have a couple of different statistics here, and more than 15% are English language learners in there. So this is not a district that has all of the financial advantages and the affluence in their community to provide resources. They really had to focus on human capital and elevating the expertise of teachers into decisions to make these changes. And as we mentioned before, they were failing before they put these processes in this distributed leadership model in place. But tell me about some of the success stories. So right now, I think most people would point to that district and say, this is a district that's getting it right. Their outcomes are what we want from districts. What does that district look like now that they have implemented these changes?
What does it look like? So I think that one of the things that I think both of us were sort of taken by was the way she talked about how it had changed the community, that, it's now difficult to buy a house there. That it's become a competitive place. The house values have gone up, and that it's a destination, right? Yeah. So rather than being a place that, oh gosh, that's your school district, it's become like a place that others want to be and want to go.
And I think I'm gonna interrupt there, because that is, we as teachers don't think about that too often. We don't really care about property values, right? Unless we live in the district and it directly impacts us. But if you are a superintendent of a district, property values are the whole ballgame, right? Like, you want to keep your community happy. And this is the first time that I've really heard the case made that if you empower your teachers, if you allow your teachers more agency, more autonomy into the process, if you elevate their expertise into decision-making, your property values will go up, right? And I think that is such a compelling case for superintendents who might never think about teacher leadership as something being important.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think about it, it works in corporate America, and not that we want schools to be treated like corporations. I'm not trying to make that argument, but I do.
Right.
No. But I do think that some of the most successful companies. Is it Google that gives everybody like a day a month to do a think tank, or even my niece worked for a long time at Trader Joe's, and they got all this just all this like build them up kind of training on, like how to be the Trader Joe's kind of person, and empowered them to, like interact with customers, to get to know the products. I mean, they were sending them home with things so that you could talk knowledgeably. Oh, I used that the other night. Like they wanted you to have sort of that Trader Joe's vibe. And they could be more competitive then about who they hired, and then they could be more competitive about the wages that they offered. And the place is it's a destination. It's like people want to shop there. So it's the same idea. I think when you and families know it. Families know it even in when you're thinking about a more affluent school district. If you go to that district, you want to go to that building, but not that building. It's all the sort of affective stuff that that people look at when they think that's the place I want to be.
Yeah. So I'm gonna transition now to make sure that we talk about some of the amazing work that you are doing in addition to the chapter that you wrote. So when the pandemic hit back in March and Pennsylvania schools went completely online, the Pennsylvania Teachers Advisory Committee, of which you're a very active member and you take leadership roles in there, put together some professional learning communities to support teachers that were going through this massive shift. And you were right there. You took leadership in that middle school group, and for months had weekly meetings with teachers to make sure that their needs were being met, to hear their concerns, to make sure that you were networking teachers and getting their expertise into important places. And then just this summer, we had a virtual summit where you were a moderator, moderating on some of PTAC's recommendations there. You've been all over. I know student teaching work. You were involved in that. You've been doing a ton of teacher leadership work over the past 2 seasons. Talk a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned about teacher leadership in general, and maybe specifically some of that work and just what you've taken out of that and lessons that you've learned.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think even at the most basic level, there was this sense of, we were all sort of in uncharted territory, and it was important to me, and I hope it was important to the rest of the group, to be in collaboration with other people who, are more inclined to see adversity as an opportunity than a disaster. And so there was an amount of, oh gosh, this happened this week, it was rotten. But then it always led to, because someone in the group could say, I have an idea for you, so there was the support, the social emotional support for teaching in trying times, but then also this sense of, I think I can see a way that this could work out. And so having both aspects of that, and then the growth, and then being able to take, the growth within that community, and then that spread back out into people's buildings as well. People ended up bringing, teammates in. Some of the people that filtered in were like other people who use our same reading and writing workshop curriculum, but in other local districts, they ended up joining. And so, not only did it sort of give us the support we needed to do the work well, but then it also fostered professional relationships that led to me, and for me anyway, and I think for others, sort of raising the level of the teaching that we'll do this fall as well, because you got to see sort of the full span, and be able to say, well, a lot of districts do this, whereas a lot of districts do that. And so it sort of led you on paths of, these are the things that I want to have sort of in mind as I head back in for real in fall.
Yeah. Two of the things that struck me, and they're kind of parallel in those PLC meetings, and I wasn't specifically in that middle school group. I think I only made one of your meetings, but I was in some of the others, was that network teachers are more successful, right? And we saw that in our PLCs, in our groups, where teachers that were just collaborating within the PTAC network, the Teacher Advisory Committee network, were bouncing ideas off each other and were able to be more successful because they were learning new things. But the other thing that seemed to me, and again, this is anecdotal, this is just my observations, but it really fits in with your chapter nicely, is that districts that were willing to reach into their teaching staff and say, we're in crisis, what expertise do you have that can help us out? Administrators that were willing to do that, their schools were more successful in making that transition, and I would imagine are more successful in putting a plan together this coming school year. Is that something that you saw also?
Definitely. We had, my own district. I know my kids' district. We had a meeting last night with a couple of the superintendents, sort of like a community forum. We have a thunderstorm starting outside my window here, so you see it's getting darker, and really thinking, what needs to be better. Our teachers here where I live were just in really deep study of trauma-informed education and SEL, how to infuse that into the curriculum. My district wrote a grant because one of the hardest things about making the switch was redesigning the curriculum so that it fit online. And sometimes it meant reimagining it completely. alongside the actual, sheer number of hours it took to teach that way. So you were sort of having, normally you're heading into teaching with your curriculum already in your pocket. So, or at least mostly, the most important parts of it are anyway. So they wrote a grant in my district and were able to not only bring in people who wanted to sort of start to shape the fall in terms of writing, but they were able to pay us to do it as well. So it was nice to have the time in summer, and I feel completely differently heading into fall, just knowing that I have the first several weeks are sort of ready to go, and yesterday we tweaked things, but it's tweaking things and not thinking, what are we going to do?
Right.
And
right.
that's it's better for the kids, obviously, because we spent the time investigating best practices and then reimagining the units, but also it's just better for us. I was burnt out in June,
Yeah.
I was working 10 or 15 hours a day on average, and just, the kids needed so much, and so many middle school kids did not want to come to group meetings to ask for help. So I was doing a lot of one-on-one meeting. So it's going to be so much better because it's just angled to fix all the things we know were wrong, and then also just recognizing the amount of time that has to go into envisioning it. Like, we got that time this summer. So
and the theory behind a distributed leadership model is that teachers who are at the point of impact with students understand the decisions that are being made that drive those interactions better than anyone else, because they're in it all the time. Mm-hmm. And often our administrators are former teachers, and they hold on to that. I know what it's like to be in the classroom. But like, I didn't teach last year. I took a year off to put this book together and to do some other things. And I know, like, I am way behind the ball because there are a couple of months there where other people were doing this kind of crazy pandemic style, triage teaching and getting in there. And for me, like, just taking 1 year off, I feel like I'm a first year teacher again, where I have to relearn it, where some other people at least have a couple months experience in there, right? Yeah. I can't imagine as an administrator now, like, you don't know what teaching looks like anymore. You may have been in the classroom at one point, but it wasn't this, right? And so you've got to lean on your teaching staff to get their feedback. Mm-hmm. So that the decisions you're making don't end up with unintended consequences that are avoidable.
Yeah, my boss was good about it. He brought teams of teachers in a bunch of times this summer to say, here's the plan for this. Yeah. Find the holes,
Right. And that's it. Find the holes, right? Yeah.
Because it was, even to our kids switch learning management systems as they come into 6th grade and they get a Chromebook. So, just that sense of how in the world, how do you come to school on the first day of school as a 6th grader in a new building with a new schedule? They found a way to get them to get their Chromebooks ahead of time. What will we tell them to do when they log in on the first day of school? Because normally they round them all up and bring them to one place, and then your homeroom teacher comes and gets you. In fact, this year they had decided that the 6th graders would start and have a day to themselves, which we ended up deciding not to do because it just didn't make sense in the way things are. But so just all of the sense of, I know our principals are working around the clock this weekend, just making sure all the infrastructure behind launching the first day, all those Zoom meetings going live at the same time. So they are, I know they were there till, 6 or 7 o'clock last night, handing out Chromebooks and textbooks. And
yeah,
so they're amazing. Our administrative team is great.
That's awesome. Yeah. So before I ask you a couple last questions, because we're almost out of time. Okay. So let me ask, I'll do it this way. Let me ask you this question. Looking at this upcoming school year, right? There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of anxiety among teachers all over the place. So what is it that you are most looking forward to, other than, of course, the chapter in an amazing book that you wrote, going live and being bought by all of your friends and family, and then seeing you as a published author? What is it? What else are you really looking forward to this school year?
I'm probably not in the majority for this, but I am definitely somebody who thrives on novelty. I can be a frustrating teammate for a person who wants to do it just like they did it last year. And that's, my brain kind of thrives on novelty. So I guess in two, like on the one hand, I'm just looking forward to trying the new stuff. I've spent so much time reading books on distance learning and integrating SEL and integrating anti-bias teaching. And, I just want to do it. So I want to have that sort of payoff of all the work of pulling all the pieces together. So that to me is the biggest thing. And then I really am looking forward just to finding the best ways to connect with my kids as we get started. And I honestly, they've given us kind of free reign to allow the first 2 or 3 weeks to be SEL stuff, setting the groundwork, get to know you activities so that we can try to build community in that way. And, and I hold a fair amount of hope for that, because we really, the PLC, even and now granted we were highly motivated teachers who were looking for a community to help us lift our level of our teaching, but I do think that and we were able to form a really great, really supportive community completely online. Like I had met one or two of the people who were there prior, but there's a bunch of people in there that I've never seen in real life, and it worked really well. So kind of taking the taking the lessons learned from that a bit and applying it to the way we'll do business at school, and just form the relationships and kind of let the year grow from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always found in the classroom, and this is true among teachers also, but in my classes, shared emotional experiences are what relationships are often built on, right? And so if we can find ways to create really awesome educational experiences that are emotive, that get kids excited or make them feel in some way, right? Even if we do that online, and the stress of the pandemic did that for us in the PLCs, right? But if we can find ways to do that for kids, even if we're online, I feel pretty confident that we can start building those relationships, and it'll be a new way, but I agree with you. I think that's something I'm looking forward to also. Although our model is, at least to start the year, we're planning on being in school 5 days a week, but I will have kids that are also at home also, right? Yeah, so they'll be coming to school, but I also have kids that are at home. So I'll be doing that, like both teaching at the same time and finding ways. But again, like my focus is going to be, how do we create those experiences where no matter where kids are, they're in the same group, they're having that together, they're discussing it, and they're feeling it, right? Yeah, so it's going to be a crazy year, but there is some stuff to be excited about. I agree with you. So thank you so much for taking some time with me today, Tracey. Thank you for the amazing work you did on this chapter. I think that it is going to move a lot of people when they read it to look at leadership models in school differently. And thank you for all of the work you're doing for teachers all over Pennsylvania and beyond.
I thank you, because you're the reason I ended up in a lot of those opportunities. So it's nice to sort of connect with people who help you make bigger connections too. Yeah. So you've been helpful in opening that world up for me.
Well, absolutely my pleasure. It's what I love doing. And for those of you that are listening and interested in purchasing the book, you can find it on Amazon. It is Flip the System US, How Teachers Can Transform Education and Save Democracy. It will be shipped coming out this fall. Definitely before the presidential election, although that is not the purpose of the book. It is really focused on education and how we can build a more democratic system through our education, through our schools. So thanks, Tracey, and we will see you soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
Okay, bye.